So I've been asked also about cremation. Cremation is something that's more common today in the West, and they have very efficient ways of doing that to dispose of a person's body. In the scriptures, the regular habit of believers from ancient times, from Abraham and the Jews, and then even in the New Testament, is burial. In fact, for most of them, it was burial within a day or so because they did not embalm their bodies. Then Jewish people and I think many Muslims, it's the same kind of practice to just honor the body by uh, wrapping it carefully, sometimes with spices like they did the Lord Jesus, but they would inter the body usually within a day or so. There are cases in the Bible where bodies were burned. One of them, there's no comment in it in 1 Samuel 31 about the men of Jabesh who went to get the bodies of Saul and his sons, and they took them and then they burned them and then they buried the bones that remained. And there's no critique of that. It's just that that's something that they did to try to honor Saul and his sons. And the usual thing was a quick burial. Good example is in Acts 5 when Ananias and Sapphira are judged by the Lord because of their lie to God about what they were doing. And it was a discipline that was an example for the church that God means business about his people following his principles, and especially don't lie to God because he already knows everything. But they were buried within the day. So it's an example very clearly in Acts chapter 5. Back in Genesis 3:19, God declares that because of Adam's sin, his body was made from dust, and the body would be returned to the dust. So there's no particular prohibition against cremation. What's interesting is we in the West have often used embalming techniques with chemicals and things so that the body is kept somewhat presentable for a viewing and for the family to say farewell. But in the ancient times, it's interesting that Joseph was embalmed in Egypt, and he asked that his body be taken back to the promised land to be buried there, showing his faith in God's promise to his people, the Israelites, and that Joseph was committed to that. So they kept his body, by then just bones, but it was basically a sarcophagus, and they took it back 400 some years later and buried Joseph as he had requested. The Bible does not prohibit cremation. Normally, cremation has been associated with pagan practices and other religious practices, but from the Bible perspective, it's not really prohibited. So if you take care of your dead loved one in a way that is respectful, cremation would be acceptable. One of the main questions is, well, what happens with the body later? Aren't we supposed to be resurrected? And if the body is just ashes, then what happens? Well, the same thing happens with someone who is dead at sea, and the animals basically eat up everything. Other people who are whose bodies are completely destroyed in some accident or happening that they can't be even identified, let alone found. Like maybe many people at the World Trade Center at 9/11. But a good example is the story of Roger Williams. Roger Williams, the uh, Baptist preacher that died, that lived and was a leader of something of a revival in the early colonies. He was buried near an apple tree, and so when they disinterred his coffin, they found that the apple tree had uh, put its roots into the coffin, so there was no body remaining. So between the apple tree and the other decaying elements, there was nothing left. So the question would be, who ate Roger Williams? Supposedly because the elements went up into the apples. So it just illustrates that what happens with the body is it just completely disintegrates eventually anyway. It goes back to dust, just like God said. So choosing to be cremated just accelerates the process, because at the resurrection, the new bodies we have will be based on the DNA that God already designed us to have, to make those new bodies that will be suitable for eternity with God. God knows all that, and we can trust Him about that. So cremation, not the practice of Christians through the centuries, but it is permitted. And so if that's what you and your family decide and you honor your loved one, that would be fine. We're trusting God through this too. Thank you.